My ex-wife demanded our son call her new husband Dad at graduation and told me to sit in the back so I wouldn't confuse people. I agreed and took the last seat. When my son walked on stage, the principal handed him the microphone, and instead of giving his speech, he asked me to stand up. Then he pulled an envelope from his gown. The last time 400 people heard my name read out loud in a room I didn't belong in, it was a family courtroom in Stark County, and a judge was listing all the reasons a man who drives for a living couldn't be trusted with more than 2 weekends a month. This time, it was my son's voice, thin and cracking through a gymnasium microphone that was never supposed to be his to hold, saying, "Can my dad, my real dad, stand up?" For 3 full seconds, I didn't move. Up front in the reserved rows I hadn't been allowed to sit in, I watched Grant Ashford's face do something I'd never once seen it do in 3 years of forced small talk at pickup lines and Christmas mornings. It went completely blank, like someone had hit pause on a man who was usually so smooth you could skate on him. My folding chair creaked under me. Somewhere behind my ribs, my heart was doing something closer to a drum line than a pulse. I hadn't planned on being the reason 400 strangers in Crestwood, Ohio, would go silent on a Saturday morning in June, and I didn't yet know what was folded up in the sleeve of my son's gown, pressed flat against his forearm like a card he'd been holding since the dealer first sat down. 9 hours earlier, I hadn't even been sure I'd get a seat at all. I'd been driving long haul for Meridian Foods for 11 years by the time any of this happened, hauling refrigerated produce up and down the I-76-I-80 corridor in a silver Freightliner Cascadia with a chip in the driver's side mirror I'd never bothered to fix. Renee and I split when Eli was 11, and the custody fight that followed was the kind that empties a bank account and rearranges what's left of your self-respect. My attorney, Beth Calloway, had practiced family law in Stark County for over 20 years, and on the courthouse steps the day the judge signed off on Renee as primary custodian, she told me something I never forgot. "Judges don't trust an address that changes every night," she said, "and yours does. Don't fight that. Build something they can't take from you instead." So I did. Every other weekend, the ones the order actually guaranteed me, I took. And every Wednesday, my route happened to swing within 40 miles of wherever Renee and Eli were living. I texted my son one line, "You free tonight?" And more often than not, he was. We built our relationship out of the 2 hours a truck driver actually has between a delivery window and a mandatory rest break at pilot travel centers and roadside diners with laminated menus and coffee that tasted like it had been made sometime the previous Tuesday. Chili cheese fries at the Flying J off exit 14 became a running joke between us. Eli always ordered them, I always told him they'd kill him one day, and he always said that was a great way to go. I kept a chipped Meridian Foods mug in my cab that Eli had given me for a birthday when he was 13, and half the time I forgot to rinse it out between routes. Renee remarried when Eli was 15. Grant Ashford, a real estate developer with a downtown condo, and a golden retriever that never stopped barking at delivery trucks, which I always found a little funny, considering. Grant wasn't a bad man. That's the part that made all of it harder to sit with. He just wanted very badly to be seen as a father, and Renee wanted very badly for her new life to look finished and whole for the people in it. His business partners, his mother, the country club crowd Eli's report card suddenly needed to impress. Eli was 11 when we split, old enough to remember the version of us that worked, and young enough that he still asked, for the first year or two, if we were ever getting back together. I didn't lie to him about it. I told him the truth in pieces he could carry, that his mother and I loved him the exact same amount we always had, and that the two of us just couldn't be a family the way we used to be a family, and that neither of those facts had anything to do with anything he'd done. He used to fall asleep in the passenger seat of my truck on the drives back from our weekends, mouth open, one shoe always somehow off, and I'd carry him in half asleep and lay him on the couch because Renee's new lease didn't have a bed made up for him yet. Small things stuck with me from those first years the way small things do. A chipped ceramic dog he kept on his dresser that used to be his grandmother's, a school photo with a missing front tooth that Renee never got around to hanging anywhere, the particular way he said shotgun before he'd even reached the truck door. None of it was dramatic. It was just a kid, and then it was a kid I saw less of than I used to, on a schedule a judge had written down instead of one the two of us had chosen. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way water finds a crack. Freshman year, it was Eli's middle school graduation carried forward into the new building. A small thing, a certificate ceremony in the cafeteria with folding tables pushed to the walls and a sheet cake somebody's PTA committee had ordered. Grant had been in the picture 8 months by then, still new enough that I hadn't fully worked out what he meant for the shape of my week. I showed up on my own, having rearranged a delivery to make it, and found a seat 2 rows behind Renee's family without incident. It was fine, nobody said anything. But afterward, in the parking lot, I watched Eli's homeroom teacher shake Grant's hand and say, without a flicker of doubt in her voice, "You must be so proud of him." And I told myself it didn't mean anything, that a teacher who saw 400 kids a year couldn't be expected to keep every family chart straight, that it was an easy mistake born of nothing but coincidence and my own quietness in a crowd. I told myself that the whole drive home, alone, windows down, radio off, it was the first time the sentence, "Nobody actually knows who I am" to him, moved from something abstract into something with a shape and a weight, and it sat in my chest the entire 11-hour haul I picked up that same night. Sophomore year, the school sent home a family directory for the fall carnival, the kind every parent gets stapled to a permission slip. I found it wadded in Eli's duffel bag on one of our our Wednesday nights, and next to his name, under parent guardian, someone had typed Renee and Grant Ashford. Not me. Not even my name in second position. I told myself it was probably just whoever filled out the form working off whatever was fastest. Renee's household, Renee's pen. I told myself that for about 4 days, until Renee posted the fall carnival photo on Facebook with the caption, "Our family of 3. Grant's arm around Eli's shoulders, and my stomach dropped the way it does on the first big hill of a highway you've driven 1,000 times and somehow forgot was coming. I called her that night and asked as evenly as I could manage why our son's actual father wasn't listed anywhere on a form that existed specifically to answer that question. She said I was reading too much into a school flyer. She said I could put my name on things when I actually showed up to things. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back, my hands still not steady on the wheel of a truck I wasn't even driving. Junior year, it was the college fair. I'd swapped 2 deliveries and burned a rest break window to be there, walked in wearing a name tag that just said Dale because the volunteer at the sign-in table hadn't known what else to write, and watched an admissions rep from a state school shake Grant's hand and say, "You must be really proud of your son." Grant didn't correct her. He just said thank you. I stood 4 feet away holding a folder of brochures Eli would never read, and nobody in that gym had any reason to think I belonged there at all. That night, I emailed the school counselor's office, polite and careful, asking that both parents be listed correctly on Eli's file going forward. I got a reply 2 weeks later thanking me for reaching out and confirming the record had been updated, which, as far as I could ever tell, changed exactly nothing. Underneath all of it, the real thing kept going anyway. Eli got his license junior year and started driving himself to our Wednesday meetups, which meant Renee didn't have to know where he actually was between track practice and dinner. We talked about girls he liked and colleges he was scared to apply to, and twice about whether he should just tell his mother the truth and let the chips fall. Both times I told him no, not because I was ashamed of anything, but because I'd already lost one fight in a courtroom over who got to love that kid on paper, and I wasn't going to risk losing the version of it we'd actually built. Better a secret that was real, I told him, than a headline that got us both dragged back in front of a judge. I remember one Wednesday that fall, cold enough that we ate in the cab instead of at a booth, chili cheese fries going lukewarm on the dash while Eli talked with his mouth half full about a physics test he'd bombed, and a girl named Priya, a different Priya, he'd clarify later, laughing when he found out his English teacher shared the name, who he was too nervous to talk to at lunch. I asked him if his mom knew where he was. He shrugged and said she thought he was at the library. I told him I didn't love that answer. He said, not unkindly, that neither did he, but that the alternative was seeing me twice a month on a court schedule instead of whenever the map happened to line up, and he'd take the lie. I didn't have a good comeback for that. I still don't, honestly. We sat in that cab until almost 9, engine running for the heat, both of us in no hurry to be the one who said it was time to go. That was the shape of most of it. Not dramatic, not secretive in any way that felt like hiding something shameful, just quiet. A man and his son, splitting a bag of gas station fries in a parking lot because a courtroom had decided that was easier to schedule around than anything more permanent, and neither of us telling anyone at home how much those Wednesdays had come to matter. In February of senior year, once college acceptances started arriving and graduation stopped being an abstract date on a calendar, I did try one more time to fix it the ordinary way. I emailed the school's front office asking how family tickets got allocated for commencement and whether there was a form I needed to fill out to be listed as Eli's father for planning purposes, separate from whatever household address the mail went to. The office manager who answered was kind and clearly had no idea there was anything to be careful about. She told me tickets were unlimited that year because the ceremony had moved to the stadium, and that seating was at each family's discretion. I read that sentence 4 or 5 times in a truck stop parking lot outside Youngstown, and something in it made my chest go tight before I'd even worked out why. At each family's discretion meant, in practice, whoever Renee decided counted as family got to decide where I sat in it. I thought about calling Beth Calloway to ask if there was anything worth pursuing, a line in the custody order about school events, anything. And then I thought about the 4 years of court costs already behind me, and the version of Eli's senior year I didn't want to spend inside a courtroom instead of a truck cab, and I didn't call her. I let it go, the same way I'd let the directory form go, and the college fair go, and told myself again that it wasn't worth the fight. I was wrong about that particular February afternoon in ways I wouldn't understand for another 4 months. Senior year, 3 weeks before graduation, Renee called about seating. It's a small ceremony footprint this year, she said, which wasn't true. Crestwood's graduating class was pushing 400 kids, and the district had moved the whole thing to the football stadium to fit everyone. Rows 1 through 6 are reserved for immediate family. Grant's parents are flying in, his business partners are coming. I need Eli's day to look clean, simple. I don't want people confused about who's who. I asked her what that meant, specifically, even though some old, tired part of me already knew. It means if he says thank you to his parents up there, I need it to be smooth, she said. I need Eli to call Grant dad if it comes up, because that's what everyone there already thinks he is, and I am not going to have Grant embarrassed in front of his own mother, because you decided today was the day to make a point. You can come, just sit in general seating, in the back, so nobody's confused. My hands weren't steady on the wheel that time either, and I wasn't even driving. I looked at the chipped mug in the cup holder, at a half-finished grocery list stuck to my fridge back home that still had milk, Eli's protein bars on it from a visit 2 weeks earlier, and I said okay. I agreed to sit in the back of my own son's graduation, so a room full of strangers wouldn't get confused about a fact that had never once been in question in 18 years, that I was his father. Whether anyone in the reserved section liked the seating chart or not, I didn't tell Eli what she'd said. I found out later I didn't need to. He already knew. What I didn't know, what nobody outside 3 classrooms and 1 principal's office knew, was that 6 weeks before graduation, Eli's AP English teacher, Priya Okonkwo, 9 years into teaching at Crestwood and the faculty advisor for the school's annual Lives That Shaped Us essay contest, had assigned a blind judged memoir piece on the person who'd shaped a student's life the most. No names on the entries, 3 teachers on the panel. The winner became that year's student speaker at commencement, a slot the district had switched over from a valedictorian address 5 years earlier because, according to the superintendent's newsletter, they wanted graduation to sound like a kid's real life instead of a transcript. The panel that year was Okonkwo, an American history teacher named Owen Pruitt who'd taught at Crestwood for 6 years, and the school librarian, and all 3 of them read every entry with names and student IDs stripped off by the front office before the folders ever reached them, per the contest's own rules, printed the same way every year in the spring newsletter. Eli won by enough of a margin that Okonkwo told me later there wasn't a real debate among the 3 judges. He'd written about a man who drove a refrigerated truck for a living, who'd rebuilt an entire relationship with his son out of 40-mile detours and gas station coffee because the alternative was letting a piece of paper decide how much a father he got to be. He hadn't named me in the essay. He hadn't needed to. Okonkwo had known the broad strokes of our situation for almost 2 years by then. Eli had broken down crying in her classroom during a personal narrative unit junior year and told her more than he'd told almost anyone, including, at the time, me. When the judging panel unsealed the entries and found out whose name was attached to the winning essay, Okonkwo did something the contest rules didn't strictly require. She walked it down the hall to Principal Diane Whitfield's office and asked for 15 minutes. Whitfield had run Crestwood for 11 years and had, by her own admission, sat through more than her share of graduation speeches that said nothing anybody would remember by July. She read Eli's essay standing up at her own desk, according to Okonkwo, and didn't sit down until she'd finished it twice. 2 days later, Eli asked for a meeting of his own. He told Whitfield and Okonkwo the parts of the story his essay hadn't spelled out by name, the back row, the so nobody's confused, the 2 years of secret Wednesdays that had made the whole thing possible to write in the first place. He asked if there was any way, procedurally, that his moment at the podium could be his. Not a rewrite of school policy, just a door left open a crack. Whitfield didn't approve everything he asked for right away. She told him plainly that graduation ran on a tight schedule with a superintendent, a school board president, and 400 diplomas to get through, and that whatever he did up there had to fit inside roughly 90 seconds without derailing the ceremony. She also told him, and Okonkwo repeated this to me almost word for word months later, that in 11 years she had never once regretted giving a kid room to tell the truth about his own life. Eli submitted an approved note card to satisfy the program requirements, 3 generic sentences about gratitude and hard work that the guidance counselor, a blunt, good-humored man named Sal Halloran, who'd run Crestwood's counseling office for going on 9 years, helped him draft specifically so it would pass without anyone up front reading past the first line. Halloran also quietly confirmed, through the general admission gate rather than the family list Renee had submitted, that a general seating ticket for one Dale Voss would scan without incident. Nobody told me any of this beforehand. Eli's exact words to Okonkwo, when she offered to loop me in early, were, "He's driven 40 extra miles 100 different Wednesdays without knowing if it was going to be enough. I want him to find out it was, in real time, like everybody else." Halloran, for his part, ran the whole thing like a man who'd spent 9 years learning exactly how much of a school's machinery bent quietly and how much of it didn't. He confirmed the general admission ticket count against Renee's submitted family list twice, once 3 weeks out and again the Thursday before, to make sure no clerical hiccup would strand me at the gate on a technicality. He walked Eli through the actual choreography of the moment, where Whitfield would be standing, how many steps from the podium to the aisle mic, how long 90 seconds actually feels once you're the one holding a microphone in front of a stadium. The night before graduation, according to Okonkwo, Eli read the full essay out loud once in an empty classroom with just the 2 of them in the room, and got through it clean until the last paragraph, when his voice gave out and he had to stop and start it over. She told him that was fine. She told him it would probably happen again in front of 400 people, and that was fine too. Graduation morning, I got to the stadium an hour and 40 minutes early, the way I always used to get to job sites when I still worried about first impressions, and stood in a general admission line behind families with coolers and folding chairs of their own, while the reserved section up front slowly filled with people who did not have to stand in any line at all. I watched Renee walk the rows in a pale blue dress, touching shoulders, laughing at something Grant's mother said, glancing back once, just once, toward the general seating gate like she was making sure the chart had held. It had. I sat exactly where I'd been told to sit, 11 rows back on the aisle, close enough to see the stage through a gap in taller shoulders and far enough that if you didn't already know to look for me, you never would have. A woman next to me, a grandmother by the look of the corsage pinned to her cardigan, asked if I had a kid graduating. I said yes. She asked which row he was sitting in on the field, and I said I wasn't sure yet, which was true in a way she didn't have any reason to understand. The heat came up off the turf in waves by 9:30, and somewhere behind me, a baby started fussing and got walked up the bleacher steps to be bounced quiet. I kept my program rolled tight in one hand, unrolling and re-rolling it without noticing I was doing it, the way you do with something when your hands need a job and there isn't one. I thought about the courtroom in Stark County more than once in that hour, the wood paneling, the judge's reading glasses low on her nose, the specific way unstable schedule had sounded coming out of another lawyer's mouth like it was a diagnosis instead of a job. I hadn't thought about that room in years. Something about sitting in a folding chair I'd been assigned to, again, by someone else's decision about where I belonged, brought it right back up to the surface. The ceremony opened the way they always do. The processional, the national anthem, the superintendent's welcome that ran 4 minutes longer than it needed to. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a text from Eli that just said, "Love you, whatever happens." And I didn't have time to write back before the program moved to diplomas. Name after name after name called across the field in alphabetical order, while I sat with my hands flat on my knees so nobody could see they weren't steady. Voss comes early in the alphabet. I'd have already been called and walked and sat back down again if Eli had been graduating under my name that morning. He wasn't. Legally, he still was. Voss, on paper, always had been. But nobody up front seemed to be counting on that mattering today. And for a second, watching the V names come and go, I let myself think that was the whole story. That I'd sit in the back, clap when he crossed, and drive to a diner with him quietly after, the way we always did, off the record. Then Whitfield stepped to the podium instead of the assistant principal, who'd been introducing the diploma names all morning, and said the program was about to do something a little different. This year, she said, our student speaker was chosen the way it should be, not by rank, but by the truth of what they wrote. I'd like to bring up Eli Voss. My whole chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with the metal folding chair. Eli walked up in a gown a size too big, the way every 18-year-old's gown always is, and Whitfield didn't hand him a program printout or gesture him toward the podium mic stand the way she had for every other name that morning. She crossed the stage, unclipped the handheld microphone from its stand herself, and put it directly into his hand. He held it for a second like it was heavier than it looked. "I had a speech," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word, thin over the stadium speakers, "about gratitude and hard work. 3 sentences. I wrote it myself, mostly so nobody would ask questions about the one I actually wanted to give. Somewhere up front, I saw Renee's head turn slightly toward Grant. 6 weeks ago, I won an essay contest about the person who shaped me most," Eli said. "I didn't put a name on it because the rules said not to, but I'm going to say it now. It's about my dad, my real dad. Not because anybody else in my life hasn't tried. He has, and he's a good man. And I mean that." A small, steady pause. I watched Grant's jaw tighten, and then, unexpectedly, loosen. "But there's a difference between someone who shows up because it looks right and someone who's been showing up for 2 years at truck stops off I-76 because it was the only way he was allowed to." My stomach dropped clean through the folding chair. "For most of high school," Eli said, "I met my dad on Wednesdays at gas stations. Not because he wanted it that way. Because a lawyer told him after the divorce that judges don't trust a schedule that changes every night, and his does, so instead of fighting for more time in a courtroom, he just showed up in the time he already had. 40 extra miles, sometimes 80. A chili cheese fries dinner in a parking lot because that's the only window there was. Every single week, for 2 years. Whether or not anyone with a family directory form ever wrote his name down. A ripple moved through the reserved rows. The particular kind of stillness that happens when 400 people all decide at once to stop shifting in their seats. Somewhere out on the field, a phone camera light blinked on, then another, then a dozen more. Small white rectangles rising above the gowns like a second graduation nobody had planned for. "I wrote in the essay that people talk about fathers like it's a job title," Eli said, steadier now, reading a line he'd clearly said out loud enough times that it had worn smooth. "Like it's something you get handed because of where you happen to be standing when the pictures get taken. But a title's not the same as 40 extra miles on a Wednesday when nobody's checking. A title doesn't sit in a cold truck cab until 9 at night because leaving early means leaving early. I wanted this speech to say thank you to the people who did the job because it looked good. Instead, I'm going to say thank you to the one who did it when nobody was looking, and never once made me feel like I owed him credit for it." He reached into the sleeve of his gown and pulled out a plain white envelope, a little bent from being pressed against his arm all morning. "This is my whole essay," he said, holding it up so the stadium camera on the Jumbotron could catch it, "and photos from about 40 of those Wednesdays. I kept them. I didn't think anyone needed to see them. I changed my mind about that this morning." Then he looked out past the podium lights, past the reserved rows, straight into general seating, 11 rows back. "Dad, can you stand up?" For 3 full seconds, I didn't move. And then I stood, my knees not entirely steady under me, and 400 people who had never once been confused about anything in their lives turned around at the same time to look at a man in a folding chair in the back who drove a refrigerated truck for a living. Grant didn't look angry. That was the part I hadn't braced for. He looked for just a second like a man setting something down he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He was the first person in the reserved section to start clapping. Renee didn't clap right away. She sat very still, one hand pressed flat against her chest, and I watched something move across her face that I recognized from 18 years of marriage and divorce and every every fight in between. Not fury, not the performance of being wronged she was so good at in front of an audience, but something closer to being caught out by her own son in front of the exact people she'd spent 2 years trying to impress. She'd built the whole seating chart to make sure nobody got confused. Instead, 400 strangers now understood, in about 90 seconds, exactly who I was. And so, for maybe the first time since the divorce, did she. Whitfield let the applause run a beat longer than schedule probably allowed, then gently reclaimed the mic from Eli with a small, private nod that told me this had never been a surprise to her at all, and the ceremony moved on to the next diploma. But nobody in that stadium moved on quite the same way. I stood there another few seconds with 400 faces turned toward the back row, my hands finally steady, and thought, nobody's confused. Not anymore. Diplomas kept going another 20 minutes. Names and handshakes and a bagpipe recording someone in the AV booth had clearly been saving for the recessional, and I sat back down in general seating and didn't hear a single one of them. When the ceremony ended and the caps went up, I lost Eli in the crush of gowns for almost 10 minutes before I found him near the fence line, still holding the envelope, his mother standing 3 feet away from him with her arms crossed over her chest like she was cold on an 80-degree June morning. "I owe you a conversation," Renee said to me, before I'd said a word to either of them. Her voice wasn't steady either. "Not here, but I owe you one." "Okay," I said. That was all I had in me. "I told people you'd stop trying," she said, and her jaw worked like the sentence cost her something to get out. "After the divorce, I told Grant's family that. I told my own mother that. It made the story simpler. It made it easier to explain why things looked the way they looked." She glanced at Eli, then back at me. "I didn't know about the Wednesdays. Any of it. I want you to know I wasn't lying about something I knew and hid. I just never once asked." Grant came up behind her a moment later, hands in his pockets, and put out his right hand toward mine, which I hadn't expected and almost missed. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never asked either. I should have." I shook his hand. It felt strange and a little bit like relief, the kind you get after holding a weight for so long you'd stop registering it as a weight at all. Grant's mother, a sharp-eyed woman in a wide-brimmed hat who'd flown in from Scottsdale for the weekend, made her way over a minute later and looked me up and down with the frank curiosity of somebody recalculating a story she'd been told for 3 years. "Well," she said, "I suppose I owe somebody an apology for a few things I've said at dinner parties." She didn't specify what, and I didn't ask her to. It was enough standing there on scorched June grass that she'd said it in front of Renee instead of waiting until I'd left. By that evening, the local paper's education reporter, who'd been in the stands covering the ceremony for a routine graduation roundup, had already called the school twice asking whether the family in row 11 would be willing to talk on the record, and Halloran, without being asked, called me himself to warn me before the reporter found my number some other way. I told him no. Eli told the reporter the same, more politely than I probably would have managed. Beth Calloway, when I called her the next morning mostly just to tell her the story, because she'd earned the right to hear it first, laughed for a long time, and then went quiet and said she'd been doing this job for over 20 years, and it was the first time a client had ever called her with good news. Some things Eli and I decided over milkshakes that night at a diner that had nothing to do with any of my delivery routes. Didn't need 400 more people reading about them than already had. We'd said what needed saying to the 400 who were already there. 3 months later, I drove a rental truck, not the Freightliner, up to a state university 2 hours north to help Eli move into his dorm. Grant had offered, Eli told me on the phone the week before, in a way that made it clear it was a real offer and not a formality. He'd meant it, and Eli had told him thanks, but he already had someone lined up for that one. We hauled a mini fridge up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, and Eli's roommate's parents kept looking over at me every time I said something, like they were trying to place which category of dad I fit into. I didn't explain it to them. Eli didn't either. I still had sawdust and produce crate splinters worked into the creases of my hands from a delivery 2 days earlier, and at one point Eli's roommate asked, with the easy bluntness of an 18-year-old who doesn't yet know which questions land wrong, what I did for a living. "He drives," Eli said before I could answer, in a tone that made it sound like the most impressive job description in the building, and didn't offer anything else, and didn't need to. Renee had texted that morning, "Drive safe, tell him I love him, and thank you for today." 3 sentences that would have been unthinkable from her 18 months earlier. I hadn't written back yet. I wasn't sure there was a version of a reply that fit into a text message, so I let it sit, unanswered but not unread, the way some things are better left for later. When the last box was empty and his roommate had gone to find the campus bookstore, Eli pulled the same envelope out of his backpack, a little more worn now, the corners soft, and set it on his new desk next to a lamp still in its plastic wrap. "I'm keeping this here," he said, "where I can see it." I picked up the empty mini fridge box to break it down for the recycling bin, because that's the kind of thing I know how to do with my hands when I don't trust my voice yet, and told him I'd be back through this exit on I-71 most Thursdays if he ever wanted chili cheese fries and gas station coffee that tasted like it had been made sometime the previous Tuesday. "Every Thursday," he said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, neither one of us had to whisper it.